Hello my friends, and welcome to today's video where we'll be taking a quick look at the update for World of Stands. This is a game that I've had a tumultuous relationship with over the years. It came out completely broken and content barren, and so I basically said it was mostly a waste of time. And then a few months after its release, I went back to it, tried it again, and I still felt like it was mostly a waste of time. But after playing some real garbage and then coming back to this game with a new perspective, I came to the conclusion that I was pretty wrong about the game. The end-all be-all is, while it wasn't necessarily exactly what I wanted and exactly what I was looking for, there's definitely a game here. It's the most game of really any Roblox Jojo game on the platform. And because of that, over time, I've sort of come to the conclusion that despite this, again, not being exactly what I want out of a Roblox Jojo game, especially because the combat, in my opinion, is extremely flawed, but regardless of the problems that I have with it, I think that this truly is probably the best Roblox Jojo game on the platform. And because of that, when people came to me and they were like, "Hey Eclipse, part 3 for World of Stands is out, can you play it?" I was like, well, I don't see why not. And so I jumped back into this game, and overall I think my impressions were relatively good. Before we talk about the entire update itself, I think I can comfortably say that if you haven't played World of Stands, now is definitely the best time to jump into it. As the game has gone on and gotten more and more content, it really just has improved. I'm not a longtime player of the game, obviously, despite being here from, well, literally the start. And so I don't know if I'm going to be completely wrong saying this, but I think I can relatively comfortably say that the game has done nothing but improve since its launch. Any longtime World of Stands players can tell me if I'm wrong in the comments and let me know what updates they put out that made the game worse, but as far as I can see, it's done nothing but get better. Anyways, the main draw of the new update for World of Stands is pretty obvious. It's the Part 3 update to the storyline and the introduction of the Part 3 map. Let's talk about the storyline first. When I come into Roblox Jojo Games, I don't expect the storylines to be anything groundbreaking. The one thing that I will say about World of Stands, though, is that I think the thing that makes it stand out against every single other game is that rather than just trying to retread everything that's done before, they generally do some original things with the source material. It's not just, oh, you replace a character in the storyline, they do actually have their own story going on. Granted, I don't think that their story is, exactly AAA level, but whatever, it's Roblox. And yes, I can already hear you in the comments going, "Eclipse, but didn't you say that it's just Roblox is a bad excuse?" Yes, it is, but the game has more to offer than just the storyline, so I don't want to harp on that too long. Now, whether or not a lot of this stuff makes sense, well, it doesn't really matter. The basis of the storyline is basically that you and Joseph are trying to go back in time to save Caesar, who died at the end of Part 2, obviously. When you are about to go back in time, Dio shows up right after Joseph goes through the portal back in time and screws everything up. And that's supposed to be able to explain why Joseph just went from being perfectly normal and young to old Joseph from Part 3. Now, obviously, there are mountains upon mountains of holes with this plotline, especially considering the fact that the other characters of Part 3 presumably are going to be the same age they were in Part 3. At the very least, Avdol and Polnareff, who we run into at the end of the current set of the storyline missions, appear to be the same age that they are in Part 3. So old Joseph existing now wouldn't make sense, because if you came back to the current timeline, then Polnareff and Avdol would either be really young or not born yet. Not only that, but I don't know if we're going to run into Jotaro, and assuming we do run into Jotaro, well, yeah, you probably start to see the holes. Again, these are minor nitpicks. I'm not trying to go into the canonicity of the World of Stands storyline because, well, obviously it's nowhere near canon. And you can very easily just make the argument that in this timeline, Avdol and Polnareff are born earlier, and this is just how old Joseph comes about. Again, it's not supposed to be following the exact events of JoJo's, it's just sort of using that as a template. Regardless, the main emphasis of this storyline is tracking down Avdol with old Joseph. You'll have encounters with Death 13, the Sun, several desert bandits, and of course Enyaba's Misty Town. The story quests aren't necessarily something so fantastic that you're gonna write home about them, but they do serve the purpose that they're supposed to serve. I'm going to do a quick pros and cons when it comes to the storyline as a whole. When it comes to positives, I think the easiest place to start is probably this first bandit camp encounter. When you get to this bandit camp and start attacking the bandits inside, you'll start getting shot at by snipers on the ridges. Now initially I just sort of tried to ignore the snipers, which is a real pain in the ass because they're constantly shooting at you. My assumption was, of course, the developers probably couldn't be bothered to make this an actual combat puzzle, and if I actually get up there and kill the snipers, they'll probably respawn so quickly that I'll just be wasting their time. And well, I should have had more faith in the developers because I was dead wrong. Eventually, after getting tired of the snipers, I went up and took them all out, and to my astonishment, they didn't respawn for a long time. So far, my general encounters with NPCs in this game have been very negative. I've consistently been negative in all of my videos about World of Stands, talking about how the AI and the general AI encounters, especially when it comes to open world encounters, are clearly gimped by the fact that they're open world encounters. They need to be designed for a whole bunch of different people, and because of that, if you're going through it by yourself, it's usually just sort of awkward. Enemies that don't aggro on you, that you can just walk past, enemies with just weird placements. Like I said, it's just usually not super great. And so in this instance, I have to eat those words because this encounter is fantastic. It does still suffer from some of the problems, like the fact that the desert bandits just don't aggro on you, and the reason that they don't aggro on you is pretty simple. If they did, you would get overwhelmed and ganked very quickly. At the very least, the bandit captains as well as the snipers do auto-aggro onto you. But anyways, the point is that this combat encounter is the most interesting so far in the game because, well, there's actually a combat puzzle. Granted, it's not a super interesting or involved combat puzzle, but anything is better than literally nothing. Moving forward with the positives, and finally, World of Stands has a real shop. I was a huge critic of the way that they handled item obtainment and shops in the past. I did start to feel a little bit better about it once I started to understand how items worked, even though it's very poorly explained. If you're curious and you're a new player to the game, basically there's a whole bunch of chests that spawn in the game and they refresh daily, on top of the fact that you can do daily quests that'll get you items. But at the end of the day, the real best way to get items was to rack up bounties, which basically would either mean walking around randomly killing people for no reason in the main game, or specifically farming an alt over and over and over again so that way you could get bounty points, and that was effectively the way that you farmed for items in this game. It was super lame and really just encouraged alt farming. It made the discrepancy between people who knew that you could farm alts and understood the systems and the people who had no idea incredibly large. And honestly, it just wasn't really fair. With the introduction of the shop, I think a lot of this is going to be alleviated because, well, you can actually buy stuff. Most of the stuff in the shop can be purchased by Stardust, and you get Stardust by doing domains, killing enemies, basically a whole lot of assortments of things. But at the end of the day, the fact that there's even a shop here at all is greatly, greatly appreciated. And finally, the last outward positive that I have to talk about when it comes to the storyline, which, I mean, I suppose the last one wasn't entirely about the storyline itself, but this one isn't necessarily either, and that's the final domain of the update. The Misty Town domain is pretty cool, seems pretty inspired, and generally I don't have too many bad things to say about it. I do have a few, but we'll cover those in the negative section. Speaking of negatives, well, we gotta get into that right now. I just want to preface before I complain a bunch that I did enjoy the update quite a bit. So despite the fact that I'm probably going to say a whole lot of bad things, remember that I'm saying these things in hopes that they can get ironed out or fixed by the developers and not because I hate the game. We gotta start right at the start with the sun encounter. I just gotta be honest here, this is just not very good. Basically, there's two parts of the encounter with the sun. The first part, you're intended to break through the heat and then destroy some mirrors in order to stop the sun from hurting you. The thing that's kind of confusing here is that the shadows do not indicate whether or not you're going to take damage. So you can be directly blocked from the rays of the sun and still taking damage. I just look at stuff like this and I'm like, did they playtest this or did they just not care? It's really, really strange and I don't understand it. It's consistently like this across this entire section and it's just weird. Once you get to the part where you are supposed to destroy the mirrors, well, you just have to run through and tank the damage to destroy the mirror. And yeah, sure, you have plenty of health to do this, but it feels really, really strange that you're just supposed to brute force this. At least that's what it seems like. As far as I could tell, for the most part, you could just hold forward, ignore the damage, and destroy the mirrors. I don't really understand the point of putting in an obstacle that you basically can just ignore. Personally, I think it would have made a hell of a lot more sense if the damage was handed out at more of a very obvious interval, and so in between the intervals of damage, you had to specifically find paths to get to the mirrors. And if you get caught out in the open, the sun would do a lot of damage to you. So that way it would actually kill you if you got caught out in the open for too long. Right now though, you just sort of ignore it and run right through. After you shut off the mirrors, you run into the sun's user himself. But before you fight him, you need to talk to this NPC. And because the user is so close to the NPC, at least in my case, I started getting attacked while I was still talking to the NPC. Again, this is one of those QA things where I'm like, did they test this? Did I just get a bug? It seems really, really strange that I'm getting attacked before the fight seemingly should even begin. This is one of those moments where I almost feel like they should have made the NPC one of those you have to attack it first to aggro because, well, this is whack. The next thing is less of a criticism of the storyline and more a criticism of the game and how it handles its NPCs. Mostly the fact that NPC ganking, if you're playing solo, is completely ridiculous and way out of hand. It's been like this since the very start of the game. I doubt they'll ever fix it, but I will continuously be annoyed by it because, well, it's just annoying. Basically, the AI in this game has no real failsafe when it comes to ganking a solo player. That means that if you start getting attacked by 2 or 3 AIs at the same time, well, they're all gonna phase inside of each other, all use attacks at the exact same time, and you're gonna take a shitload of damage. It heavily, heavily, heavily encourages you to use the age-old Dark Souls approach of just luring one enemy out at a time, which in a mostly power fantasy-based game like JoJo's games generally are, and this game seemingly wants to be, well, it feels really, really strange to be playing this way. In the final dungeon of the game, you'll walk in and there'll be rooms full of enemies, and I'll be throwing projectiles at the first enemy and then running to the corner of the room to make sure I don't aggro anyone else, because I know if I do, then I'm gonna get my ass whooped. It doesn't matter how well I play, it doesn't matter how much I think about it, I'm going to get killed if I try to fight all these guys at once. It just feels really strange to have a room with a whole bunch of enemies quite close to each other, but you have to take them all on one at a time. And I understand that there are probably going to be people that are going to be like, well, Eclipse, you're meant to do these with multiple people, and that's why it is the way it is. But I don't know. Just from my perspective, I think there's a lot of people who probably play the game solo. And I just wish that more resources were put towards making the AI better, considering that a lot of this game is based around PvE and fighting AI. Speaking of AI and fighting AI, the first domain that you enter is sort of barely a domain at all. For the storyline, it kind of works, but it feels pretty lackluster. Basically, the first domain that you access is the Dream World, where you fight Death 13. Now, the thing that's kind of strange about fighting Death 13 here is that it becomes pretty abundantly clear pretty quickly that you're not actually fighting Death 13, you're fighting an invisible person with Death 13 merged sort of inside of them. What this means is that if you hit Death 13 with any sort of grab attacks, then they'll hit the invisible person and Death 13 will just kind of chill there. It's really awkward. I'm 100% sure they noticed it in their testing. I'm sure it was very difficult to try to get this to work out the way that they wanted it to, but it looks jank, and I just have to criticize things when they look jank. As for the fight itself, it's nowhere near as absurdly bullshit as the previous boss fight in the game against cars, so I guess I can give some credit there. I did find it extremely easy on my first go around, but that was probably because I've been using the world for a while and pretty much labbed out directly how to cheese the AIs. When I went back and tried it again with Star Platinum, it was a lot closer, so I assume most people are gonna have a pretty decent challenge with this fight, and that's good. What isn't good, though, is the fact that I believe domain rewards and the way they work have remained unchanged, something that I've talked about before. Basically, the way that your domain rewards work is that they're based off of your rating at the end of the level. So the higher rating that you get, the better reward that you're gonna get. The problem is that the money that you have to spend in order to access the domains is never going to get refunded to you if you do well. This is extremely strange and makes absolutely no sense. I would understand if some domains gave you more money than others to encourage variety, but in this case, well, you just have to do poorly on purpose if you want to make money, which makes absolutely no sense. Back in the day, I looked it up on Google, and there were people advocating for wasting time sitting in a corner so that way you could run the clock, or dying a shitload on purpose so that way you could tank your rating, and that's how you would get money. I don't understand why this system is the way it is. It's really, really, really bad, and I hope at some point they overhaul it because, yeah, it's not good. And the final negative is more of a general thing, and it's just bugs and, well, a bit of a lack of polish, I suppose. World of Stands generally is pretty well known for disastrous launches, at least from what I've played of the game, and I'm pretty sure it had one for this update as well. Granted, I didn't play it, so I won't talk about it too much. I'll just talk about when I played. The one major bug that I ran into was when you're supposed to fight against the mini-boss Chaka, and they're supposed to spawn in. Like, not that they're supposed to spawn in this specific area, they're supposed to spawn in, but he just didn't. I server hopped and server hopped and server hopped some more, and Chaka just never spawned. I have absolutely no clue how something like this happens, and I have absolutely no idea how it hasn't been reported to hell and back. Maybe it has and they just haven't gotten around to fixing it yet, or they don't know why. But while I was playing, I server hopped 3, 4, 5 times, and he just never showed up. For the sake of wanting to get this video out, I ended up having to buy a private server and check if he respawned there, and sure enough, he did. Now, obviously, I don't think that they broke it on purpose to encourage people to buy private servers. That would be conspiracy nonsense. That being said, the fact that I had to buy a private server in order to get this to work at all is insanity. The other sort of major, sort of minor bug I ran into was at the final boss fight of the update. When you're supposed to fight against corrupted Polnareff and Avdol, obviously there's 2 NPCs and they auto-aggro onto you, which immediately causes the ganking problem I mentioned earlier. But that ganking problem sort of gets ironed out when one of the NPCs just gives up and disappears. Polnareff just stopped trying to fight me. He just left. I don't know why, I don't know what caused him to do this, but he just left me to 1v1 Avdol, which made the fight a hell of a lot easier, but I'm just sitting there scratching my head like, why did he just give up? How is this programmed into the game where the AI will just go, actually, nah, and walk away? I'm torn on whether or not I think it's a good thing that the AI broke so I wouldn't be throwing my head against the wall, or it's a stupid thing because this fight is clearly supposed to be you against 2 enemies, but one of the enemies just decided to fuck off and disappear. I don't know, man. It's jank like this that sort of permeates the game, and some of it just is around and appears to never really get fixed. My favorite stand is the World, something that's pretty well known by this point, and it's got bugs on it that have remained since literally before the release of the game during the alpha that I played that are still around. Those bugs are the fact that if you use the dash move, it'll often just dash directly through people for seemingly no reason, and the fact that if you land the dash move, after you hit the person back, the camera tries to follow them for some reason, but while they're following them with the camera, you're still in play and so are they. So if you're using it against an AI and you don't know any better, they can start hitting you while the camera is having a heart attack. This camera follow just shouldn't be here, and this is something that should very, very quickly be found, and yet it's been here for over a year. Again, like I said, I enjoyed my time with the game once again, and I think that this game is genuinely good, but stuff like this just makes me scratch my head. Overall, for the rest of the update, there's not a whole lot to say. I enjoyed traveling through the new areas of the game and doing the quests that the NPCs had for me to do. On a normal occasion, I'd probably complain about barren wastelands, but I mean, it's supposed to be a desert, so it's not hugely surprising that it's a barren wasteland. And considering that the rest of the game outside of the desert area is not a barren wasteland, it's pretty clear to me that this was by design and not just a huge mistake by the developers. I won't complain about on-purpose barren wastelands. And really, I think that's probably wrapping up everything that I want to talk about. Once again, the game is fun, the update's good, and if you haven't played it already, I do recommend it. If you guys want to see more stuff on World of Stands, like, I don't know, maybe some of the new stands that they added that I haven't gotten yet, feel free to let me know in the comments section. I'm gonna assume probably not based on how some of my previous World of Stands videos went, but hey, you never know. With that though, I am wrapping up here. So if you enjoyed the video, you can of course leave a like and subscribe. If you didn't, don't. And with all that being said, have a wonderful day night wherever you are, and I'll see you guys next time.